The mop made a soft sound against the metal floor as Park Tae-ho pushed it forward. He had been cleaning this hallway for 2 years now, and he knew every corner, every shadow, every forgotten place on the great draconian mothership called the Throne of Embers. Tae-ho was 34 years old. Back on Earth, he had been a teacher. He taught young children how to read and write. But when the economy collapsed, schools closed and jobs disappeared. When the Draconians came offering work on their ships, Tae-ho had no choice. He signed a 5-year contract and became a janitor in space. The Draconians were massive creatures. They stood 12 feet tall, covered in scales that shimmered like precious stones. They had 4 horns on their heads, long tails, and eyes that glowed like fire. They called themselves the rulers of 12 galaxies, and they treated humans like insects. Most Draconians did not even look at Tae-ho when he cleaned around them. He was invisible, a ghost pushing a mop. Today, his supervisor gave him a new assignment, the East Wing. Tae-ho had never cleaned there before. "Nobody goes there," his supervisor said. "Just dust and empty rooms, do it once a week. That is enough." Tae-ho nodded and took his cleaning cart down the long, dark corridors. The East Wing was far from the busy parts of the ship. The lights were dim. The air was cold. It felt like a place that had been forgotten. He cleaned room after room, storage areas filled with old equipment, empty chambers with no purpose. Then he came to a large door at the end of the hallway. A sign above it read Royal Nursery in the Draconian language. Tae-ho had learned to read their writing during his time on the ship. It helped him stay out of trouble. Royal Nursery. That meant children. But the Empress's children were kept in the central palace, surrounded by guards and servants. Why would there be a nursery here in this abandoned place? He pressed the door panel, and it slid open. The room inside was large but sad. The walls were painted with faded pictures of stars and planets. Old toys sat in corners, covered in dust. And in the middle of the room, sitting on a worn carpet, were 3 small draconian children. They were young, maybe 5 or 6 years old in human terms. Their scales were softer than adult draconians, more gray than black. They had small horns just beginning to grow, and they sat in complete silence, staring at nothing. Near the window, a large draconian female sat on a chair, looking at a holographic screen. She was watching some kind of entertainment program and did not even glance at the children. This must be their caretaker, Tae-ho thought. He stepped into the room quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. The caretaker looked up, saw that he was just a human janitor, and returned to her screen without a word. Tae-ho began to clean. He swept the dust from the corners. He wiped the windows. And all the while, he watched the 3 small children from the corner of his eye. They did not play. They did not talk to each other. They just sat there, their small tails curled around their bodies, their eyes empty and sad. Then Tae-ho made a mistake. His mop slipped from his hands and fell to the floor with a loud clang. He froze, expecting the children to turn and look, but they did not move. They did not react at all. It was as if they had not heard the sound. The caretaker glanced over. "They are deaf," she said, her voice bored and cold. "All 3 of them, born broken. Do not waste your time." She turned back to her screen. Tae-ho stood very still. Deaf. These children could not hear, and from the way the caretaker spoke, it was clear that she did not care about them at all. He looked at the 3 small figures on the carpet. They were princesses, daughters of the great dragon queen herself, and yet they sat here alone, in a forgotten room, treated like they were nothing. Something stirred in Tae-ho's chest, a feeling he had not felt in a long time. Back on Earth, he had a younger sister named Yuna. She was born deaf. Growing up, everyone told his parents that Yuna would never be normal, never fit in, never succeed. But Tae-ho refused to accept that. He learned Korean Sign Language for her. He taught her. He showed her that she was not broken. Yuna was now a successful artist living in Seoul. She sent him messages every week, telling him about her paintings and her exhibitions. Ti-Ho looked at the three small draconian children. They were not broken, they were just silent, and nobody had bothered to listen. He put down his mop. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward them and knelt on the carpet a few feet away. The smallest one noticed him first. She had lighter gray scales than her sisters, and her eyes were a soft gold color. She looked at him with surprise, as if she could not believe that anyone was paying attention to her. Ti-Ho smiled gently, then he raised his hand and waved. The small one's eyes went wide. She looked at her sisters, then back at Ti-Ho. Slowly, hesitantly, she raised her own clawed hand and waved back. Ti-Ho's heart swelled. He pointed to himself and made a simple gesture, touching his chest with his palm. In Korean Sign Language, it meant me or I am here. The child tilted her head, curious. Ti-Ho did the gesture again, then pointed at her and raised his eyebrows, asking a silent question. Who are you? The child did not understand. Of course she did not. She had never been taught any signs, but she was watching him, really watching him, and for the first time Ti-Ho saw something flicker in her golden eyes. Hope. The caretaker snorted from her chair. What are you doing, human? They cannot understand you. They cannot understand anything. Just clean the room and leave. Ti-Ho stood up slowly. He bowed his head respectfully and returned to his mop. But as he cleaned, he kept glancing at the three children, and the smallest one kept glancing back. When his shift ended, Ti-Ho left the east wing. But he could not stop thinking about those three small faces, those empty eyes that had suddenly showed a spark of life when someone simply waved at them. That night in his tiny cabin, Ti-Ho made a decision. He would go back, not to clean but to sit with them, to show them that someone saw them, someone cared. He dug through his personal belongings and found an old tablet his sister had given him before he left Earth. It contained videos of Korean Sign Language lessons. He watched them for hours, refreshing his memory, thinking about how he could modify the signs for hands that had only 4 fingers and small claws. The next day he returned to the East Wing, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time the caretaker ignored him. Each time the 3 children watched him with growing curiosity, and each time Ti-Ho waved, smiled, and began to teach them the simplest signs. Hello, goodbye, yes, no. By the end of the first week, the smallest one, the one he would later learn was named Nari, could sign hello back to him. It was not much, just a small movement of a small clawed hand, but to Ti-Ho it was everything. He had found something worth doing in this cold, dark ship. He had found 3 small souls who needed exactly what he could give. And he was not going to let them stay silent anymore. 3 months passed on the throne of embers. Outside the ship, stars were born and died. Wars were fought on distant planets. The Dragon Queen conquered new worlds. But in the forgotten nursery of the East Wing, something beautiful was growing. Ti-Ho came every day now. He had rearranged his cleaning schedule so that his last stop was always the nursery. The other human workers thought he was strange. Why would anyone want to spend extra time in that sad, empty part of the ship? But Ti-Ho did not explain. He simply smiled and went on his way. The 3 children waited for him. Every day when the nursery door opened, 3 pairs of eyes would turn toward it with excitement. Nari, the smallest, would bounce on her feet. Kira, the oldest, would sit up straight with dignity, pretending she was not excited, but her tail would wag behind her. Lith, the middle sister, would grin and wave before Ti-Ho even stepped inside. The caretaker, Drethval, had stopped paying attention long ago. She sat in her corner with her screens and entertainment, happy that something was keeping the children quiet and out of her way. She never reported anything to the palace. Why would she? These children were considered defective by the royal court. Nobody asked about them. Nobody cared. But Ti-Ho cared. He had spent many nights in his small cabin, working on a new project. Korean Sign Language was designed for human hands with 5 fingers. The draconian children had 4 fingers and small claws. Many signs were impossible for them to make correctly, so T-Ho changed them. He watched the children's hands carefully. He learned how their fingers moved, how their claws bent. Then he redesigned each sign to fit their bodies. It took weeks of patient work, but slowly a new language was born, a language just for them. Nari learned the fastest. She was curious about everything and never got tired of practicing. Her golden eyes would light up each time she mastered a new word. She would sign it over and over, looking at T-Ho for approval, and he would nod and smile and sign back good, very good. Kira was more careful. She was the oldest, and she felt responsible for her sisters. She studied each sign seriously, making sure she understood it perfectly before moving on. She wanted to be able to teach her sisters when T-Ho was not there. Lith was playful. She liked to make jokes with the signs, combining words in silly ways that made her sisters laugh. T-Ho encouraged this. Language was not just for serious things. It was for joy too. The first words they learned were simple: hungry, tired, happy, sad, play, stop. Then came more complex ideas: want, need, help, please, thank you. Then came the words that mattered most: friend, family, love. The day Nari signed her first complete sentence, T-Ho had to turn away so the children would not see the tears in his eyes. She had tugged his sleeve and looked up at him with her big golden eyes. Then her small clawed hands moved carefully through the air. You come back. It was not perfect. Her fingers fumbled a little on the word back. But the meaning was clear. She was asking if he would return. She was asking if she could count on him. T-Ho knelt down so they were at the same height. He looked into her eyes and signed slowly and clearly. Always. Nari's whole face changed. A smile spread across her features, wider than T-Ho had ever seen. She threw herself forward and hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck, her tail curling with happiness. Kira and Lith joined in. 3 small draconian children, holding onto one human janitor like he was the most important thing in the universe. And in that moment he was. The weeks continued to pass. The children's vocabulary grew and grew. They could now have real conversations. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their hopes. They asked T-Ho about Earth, about humans, about his life before the ship. He told them stories about his sister Yuna, about the ocean he grew up near, about the taste of his mother's cooking. They told him about their father. He had been a draconian lord who loved human culture. He had given them their names, choosing words from human languages that he thought were beautiful: Kira, Lith, Nari. He had died in a war 3 years ago, and after that, their mother had sent them to the East Wing. She was too busy conquering galaxies. She did not have time for daughters who could not hear her commands. T-Ho felt anger rise in his chest when he heard this, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would not help the children. What they needed was love, not rage. So he gave them love. He gave them his time, his patience, his attention. He showed them that they were not mistakes. They were not broken. They were simply different, and different was not wrong. He taught them games that did not need sound. He brought them picture books from the human quarters of the ship. He drew silly faces to make them laugh. He held them when they cried. And slowly, the sadness in their eyes began to fade. They started to play with each other, communicating in their new language. They started to smile and laugh and dream again. Drethval noticed none of this. Or if she noticed, she did not care. She called it human foolishness and went back to her entertainment. But one day, she said something that made T-Ho's blood run cold. "The war has ended," she announced casually, not looking up from her screen. "The Queen is returning. She will be back on the ship in 2 weeks. T-Ho froze. The Queen, Empress Varashin, the mother of these 3 children, the most powerful being in 12 galaxies. He had never thought about what would happen when she returned. He had been so focused on the children, on teaching them, on loving them, that he had forgotten the larger world outside the nursery. What would the Empress think when she saw a human janitor sitting with her daughters? What would she do when she learned that he had been teaching them a language she did not know? Draconian punishment was legendary in its cruelty. Humans who displeased their masters could be sent to labor camps on frozen moons. They could be thrown out of airlocks. They could simply disappear. Fear gripped Tiho's heart. For a moment, he thought about stopping. He thought about never coming back to the nursery, about pretending none of this had ever happened. But then he looked at the three children. They were sitting together, teaching each other new signs he had shown them yesterday. Nari was demonstrating the word for star, while Kira helped her get the finger position right. Lith was adding her own silly version that made it look like a star exploding. They were happy. They were alive in a way they had never been before. How could he take that away from them? He could not. Tiho made a decision. He would continue teaching them for as long as he could. If the queen returned and punished him, then so be it. At least the children would have their language. At least they would be able to talk to each other. At least they would know that someone had loved them. He walked over to the children and sat down on the carpet. They immediately turned to him with bright eyes. "What are we learning today?" Kira signed. Tiho smiled and raised his hands. "Today," he signed, "we learn the most important sentence of all." He showed them, one gesture at a time. "I love you." The three children practiced it carefully. Then, one by one, they signed it back to him. "I love you." Tiho's eyes grew wet again. He did not hide it this time. "I love you too," he signed back. "All three of you, always." 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks left. He would make every moment count. The great warship descended through the clouds of the mothership's docking bay like a falling mountain. Its engines roared with the sound of conquered worlds. Its hull was scarred from 1,000 battles, and on its bridge stood Empress Narration, ruler of the Draconian Empire, conqueror of 12 galaxies, the Dragon Queen herself. She was magnificent and terrifying. 12 feet tall, her scales were the color of black fire, shifting between obsidian and deep purple as the light touched them. 4 great horns crowned her head, curved and sharp like the blades of ancient warriors. Her eyes burned with golden flame, and when she spoke, even the bravest soldiers trembled. But today, the Empress was tired. The war against the collective of Rin had lasted 18 months. It was a brutal campaign across frozen planets and burning stars. Narration had led her armies from the front, as she always did. She had torn through enemy lines with her own claws. She had brought victory to her people. But victory felt empty now. Standing on the bridge, watching the mothership grow larger in the viewing screen, Narration thought about what waited for her inside. Meetings with advisors, reports from governors, celebrations and ceremonies, all of it meaningless noise. And somewhere in that massive ship were her daughters. The Empress's claws tightened on the railing. Her daughters, 3 small lives she had brought into this universe, only to abandon them in a forgotten wing of her own ship. She told herself it was necessary. The children were deaf. Defective, her advisors said. A sign of weakness in the royal bloodline. If she kept them close, if she showed them love in public, it would make the empire look weak. Enemies would circle like hungry beasts. So she had sent them away. She had given them caretakers and servants. She had made sure they had food and shelter and safety. That was enough, she told herself. That was what an empress was supposed to do. But in the dark hours of the night, between battles, Narration would sometimes lie awake and think about 3 small faces she had not seen in over a year. 3 pairs of eyes that had looked at her with confusion the last time she visited. 3 small children who did not know how to speak to their own mother. Her husband, Lord Curran, had understood them. He had loved human cultures, had studied their languages and their arts. He had spent hours with the children, playing with them, holding them, finding ways to communicate without words. Then he died in the Battle of the Crimson Nebula, and Narration did not know how to be what he had been. So she did what she always did. She went to war, she conquered, she killed. It was the only thing she was good at. The warship docked with a deep metallic groan. Officers and soldiers lined up to welcome their empress. She walked past them without a word, her cape flowing behind her like dark wings. They bowed and saluted. She did not notice. She went to her chambers. She bathed. She changed into fresh armor. And then, instead of going to the throne room where her advisors waited, she made a decision. She would visit her daughters. Just a quick visit, unannounced. She wanted to see them before the chaos of politics swallowed her again. She wanted to remind herself that they existed, that she was still their mother, even if she was a terrible one. Narration moved through the ship's corridors like a shadow. At this hour, most of the East Wing was empty. She did not bring guards. She did not alert anyone. She simply walked, following the path she still remembered from years ago. The East Wing was darker than she remembered, colder. The lights had not been maintained properly. Dust gathered in corners. This was where she had put her children. Guilt twisted in her chest. She pushed it down. There would be time for guilt later. Now she just wanted to see them. As she approached the nursery, she heard something strange, a sound she had not expected. Laughter. Narration stopped. Her ears, sensitive enough to hear a whisper from across a battlefield, focused on the sound. It was coming from behind the nursery door. Light, happy, childish laughter. Her daughters could not hear. They rarely made sounds at all. Where was this coming from? She moved closer, her steps silent as death. The nursery door was slightly open. Through the gap, golden light spilled into the dim hallway. Narration looked through the gap, and her heart stopped. There, in the middle of the nursery floor, sat a human. A small, ordinary human in the gray uniform of a janitor. He was sitting cross-legged on the old carpet, surrounded by her 3 daughters. The children were moving their hands, not randomly, not helplessly, but with purpose. Their clawed fingers formed shapes and gestures that flowed from one to another like a dance. The human was doing the same thing, his hands moving in response to theirs. They were talking. Without words, without sound, they were having a conversation. The smallest one, the one with golden eyes, made a gesture and then puffed out her cheeks, making a silly face. The human laughed and made an exaggerated gesture back, moving his arms wide and pretending to roar silently. All 3 children burst into laughter, their tails wagging, their bodies shaking with joy. Narration could not breathe. Her daughters were laughing, her daughters were communicating, her daughters were happy. And it was not because of her. It was because of this human. This tiny, insignificant creature she would not have noticed if he walked past her 1,000 times. She watched for several minutes, unable to move. She watched as the oldest child, Kira, carefully showed her sisters a new hand gesture. She watched as Lith made up a silly version that had everyone laughing again. She watched as Nari climbed into the human's lap and rested her head against his chest, completely trusting, completely at peace. When was the last time any of her daughters had touched her like that? When was the last time they had smiled at her? Narration could not remember, maybe never. Slowly, silently, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Drethval, the caretaker, was asleep in her chair, snoring softly. She did not wake as the Empress entered. She would deal with that failure later. The human looked up first. His eyes met hers, and all the color drained from his face. He froze like a small animal seeing a predator. Then he quickly moved Nari off his lap and dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground. The children turned to see what had startled him. When they saw the massive figure of the Empress standing in the doorway, they went very still. They did not run to her. They did not smile at her. They looked at her like she was a stranger who had wandered into their home. Nari glanced between the trembling human and the tall draconian. She tugged her sister Kira's arm and made a series of hand gestures. Vayrashin did not understand the gestures, but she understood the question in Nari's eyes. Who is this? Why is Tiho scared? The human, still on his knees, raised his hand slowly and made a gesture back. He pointed at Vayrashin, then made a sign that looked like a crown, then touched his heart. Mother. He was telling them that she was their mother. Kira's eyes went wide. She looked at the Empress with new understanding. Then, slowly, carefully, she raised her small clawed hands and made a series of gestures. Vayrashin did not know what they meant. For the first time in her long life, she felt completely helpless. Her daughter was speaking to her, and she could not understand a single word. She looked at the human. He was still trembling, still expecting death, but she needed him. What did she say? The Empress asked. Her voice came out softer than she intended. The human swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. She said, Mother, you came. Vayrashin felt something break inside her chest. She did not know if it was her heart or her pride, maybe both. She had come. Finally, after all this time, she had come. And her children had to ask a stranger to translate. What kind of mother was she? The nursery was completely silent. Even the sleeping caretaker seemed to have stopped breathing. Tiho remained on his knees, his forehead pressed against the cold floor. His heart pounded so hard he was sure the Empress could hear it. This was it. This was how he would die. On the floor of a forgotten nursery, killed by the most powerful being in 12 galaxies for daring to touch her children. But the killing blow did not come. Instead, he heard the Empress move. Her heavy footsteps crossed the room, slow and uncertain. Not the confident stride of a conqueror, but the hesitant steps of someone lost. Look at me, human, she commanded. Tiho raised his head. From his position on the floor, the Empress looked even more terrifying. She towered above him like a mountain of scales and claws and burning golden eyes. But there was something strange in those eyes, something he did not expect. Pain. Stand, she said. Tiho obeyed. His legs were shaking so badly he almost fell, but he managed to stay upright. The 3 children watched this exchange with worried expressions. Nari had moved closer to her sisters, and they were holding hands. Their eyes kept moving between Tiho and the Empress, confusion and fear written on their small faces. Lith made a gesture. Tiho recognized it immediately. Danger. Before he could respond, Kira made a gesture back. Wait, watch. They were protecting each other. Even now, even scared, they were looking out for each other. Tiho felt a burst of pride through his fear. The Empress noticed the hand movements. Her eyes narrowed. That, she said, pointing at the children's hands. What is that? What are they doing? Tiho took a deep breath. If he was going to die, he might as well die with the truth. They are talking, Your Majesty, he said. It is called sign language. It is a way to communicate using hands instead of voice. I taught it to them. The Empress's expression shifted. Something flickered across her face, too fast for Tiho to identify. Anger, surprise, he could not tell. You taught them, she repeated. A janitor taught my daughters a language that I do not know. Yes, Your Majesty. Why? The question hung in the air. Tiho knew that his answer could mean life or death. He could lie. He could say he was bored. He could say he was just trying to keep them quiet while he cleaned. But when he looked at the 3 small faces watching him with worry in their eyes, he could not lie. Because they were alone, he said quietly. Because nobody was talking to them. Because they sat in silence day after day and nobody cared. They are not broken, Your Majesty. They never were. They just needed a different way to speak. The Empress was silent for a long moment. Her claws flexed at her sides. Her tail swayed slowly behind her. Then she turned away from Tiho and looked at her daughters. The children looked back at her. There was no warmth in their eyes, no recognition of a beloved parent. They looked at her the way they might look at any strange draconian who walked into their room. Narration took a step toward them. Nari immediately moved behind Kira, hiding from the tall figure approaching her. The Empress stopped. Her whole body seemed to sag, as if the weight of 1,000 worlds had landed on her shoulders. "They do not know me," she whispered. "My own daughters do not know me." It was not a question. It was a realization, a terrible, crushing realization. Tiho watched as the most powerful being in 12 galaxies stood helpless in front of 3 small children. He saw her shoulders shake. He saw her clawed hands tremble. He saw a mother confronting the cost of her absence. Nari tugged on Kira's arm and made a gesture. Tiho translated without thinking. "She is asking why the tall one is sad." Narration turned sharply. Her eyes were wet, glistening with tears she was fighting to hold back. "Tell her," she said, her voice rough. "Tell her why I am sad." Tiho hesitated. Then he knelt down so he was at the children's level and raised his hands. "The tall one is your mother," he signed. "She went away for a long time. She is sad because she missed you." The 3 children looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them, made of small gestures and shared looks that Tiho could not fully follow. They had developed their own private signs, their own way of talking when he was not there. Finally, Kira stepped forward. She was the oldest, the bravest, the one who felt responsible for her sisters. She looked up at the towering Empress without flinching. Then she raised her hands and signed, slowly and clearly. "Why did you leave us?" Tiho translated. He watched the Empress flinch as if she had been struck. Narration began, then stopped. She looked at Tiho desperately. "How do I answer that? How do I explain war and duty and fear to a child?" "With honesty, Your Majesty," Tiho said softly. "Children understand more than we think. They just want the truth." The Empress closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the tears had begun to fall, tracing silver lines down her dark scales. She looked at Kira and spoke, her voice breaking. "I left because I was afraid. I was afraid that I could not love you the right way. Your father knew how to talk to you. He understood you. When he died, I did not know what to do, so I ran away. I went to war because war was easier than being your mother." She paused, struggling to continue. "I was wrong. I was a coward, and I am sorry. I am so very sorry." Tiho translated every word, his hands moving through the air with as much emotion as he could put into them. The 3 children watched, their eyes wide. When he finished, there was silence. Then Nari did something unexpected. She walked out from behind Kira. Slowly, carefully, she crossed the space between them and stopped in front of the Empress. She was so small compared to her mother. Her head barely reached Naration's knee. She looked up at the towering figure above her. Then she raised her small hand and made a gesture. "Down." The Empress did not understand. She looked at Tiho. "She wants you to come down to her level," he said, "to kneel." Narration stared at him. In all her years, she had never knelt before anyone. Emperors and generals had knelt before her. Planets had surrendered at her feet. She was the Dragon Queen. She did not kneel. But looking at her smallest daughter, at the hope and fear mixing in those golden eyes, she knew she had no choice. Slowly, painfully, Empress Narration lowered herself to her knees. Her great body sank down until her face was level with Nari's. Mother and daughter looked at each other for the first time. Nari reached out and touched the Empress's face. Her small clawed fingers traced the lines of scales, the curve of horns, the wetness of tears. She was studying her mother, memorizing her, learning her like a new word in a new language. Then she turned to Tiho and made a gesture. "Teach her," she signed. "Teach mother how to talk to us." Tiho felt his throat tighten. He looked at the Empress, still on her knees, still crying, still waiting. "Your daughter wants me to teach you," he said. "She wants you to learn their language." The Empress looked at Nari, then at Kira and Lith, who had moved closer. All three were watching her now, not with fear or confusion, but with something new. Hoping. Then teach me, Narration said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Teach me how to talk to my children. Tiho nodded. He moved closer and gently took the Empress's massive clawed hand. Her scales were warm, almost hot and sharp enough to cut steel. But she allowed him to position her fingers, to shape her hand into the right form. This is the first sign, he said, the most important one. He showed her how to cross her arms over her chest, and then open them toward the person she was speaking to. It means I love you. Narration practiced the gesture. It was clumsy, awkward. Her warrior's hands were not made for gentle movements, but she tried. Again and again she tried. Finally, she turned to her daughters and made the sign. I love you. 3 small faces lit up like stars being born. 3 small pairs of hands rose and made the sign back. I love you too, Mother. And in that moment, in that forgotten nursery at the edge of the galaxy, something that had been broken for a very long time began to heal. 6 months had passed since the night the Dragon Queen knelt before her daughter in a forgotten nursery. The galaxy had noticed the changes, though it did not understand them. The Empress no longer went to war at every opportunity. She held fewer meetings with her advisors. She disappeared for hours at a time, and nobody knew where she went. But Tiho knew. He had been there every step of the way. Every evening after her duties were complete, Empress Narration came to the nursery. At first she was awkward and stiff, her warrior's body uncomfortable on the soft carpet, her sharp claws struggling with gentle gestures. But she kept coming. She kept trying. She kept learning. The children taught her as much as Tiho did. Nari would grab her mother's massive fingers and position them correctly, her small face serious with concentration. Kira would demonstrate signs over and over until the Empress could copy them perfectly. Lith would make up silly signs that made everyone laugh, and slowly, Narration learned to laugh with them. Tiho watched this transformation with wonder. He saw the cold, terrifying Dragon Queen become soft and patient. He saw her play games on the floor with her daughters. He saw her hold them when they were tired, her great arms wrapped around 3 small bodies like protective wings. He saw her become a mother. He tried to step back. This was their time, their healing. He was just a janitor, an outsider who had stumbled into their story. But the children would not let him leave. Whenever he tried to slip away quietly, Nari would grab his hand and pull him back. Kira would give him a stern look that said, "You belong here." Lith would sign, "Family stays together." And so he stayed. Now it was the day of the coronation remembrance, the most sacred ceremony in the Draconian Empire. Every year on this day, the Empress renewed her vows to the people before the assembled nobles and generals. It was a day of power and tradition, of ancient rituals and formal declarations. But this year would be different. Tiho stood at the back of the great throne room wearing a new uniform. It was not the gray of a janitor anymore. It was deep blue with silver trim, the colors of the royal household. Commander Hyun Woo, the human liaison officer, had helped him get it. He had also warned him. "Whatever happens today, keep your head down," Hyun Woo had said. "The nobles don't like change, and they definitely don't like humans." Tiho understood the warning. He had heard the whispers over the past months. The nobles were not happy. The Empress was spending time with her defective children instead of conquering new worlds. She was learning a strange language from a human servant. She was going soft. Some said she had lost her mind. Others said she had been bewitched. A few spoke of removing her from power. But Narration did not seem worried. She had spent the morning with her daughters, helping them prepare for their first public appearance. Tiho had seen the dresses made of starlight silk, the small crowns shaped like crescent moons, the polished scales and careful grooming. For the first time, the princesses would stand before the empire, not as hidden shame, but as proud members of the royal family. The throne room filled with draconian nobles. They were massive creatures, each one decorated with medals and jewels and signs of their great houses. They spoke in low voices, glancing toward the throne with hungry, calculating eyes. Then the horn sounded, the great doors opened, and Empress Narration entered. She was magnificent. Her armor shone like black diamonds. Her crown blazed with captured starfire. She walked with the power of 1,000 victories, her eyes burning gold as she surveyed her court. Behind her came 3 small figures. The nobles gasped. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. The defective children, the silent princesses, they were here. Why were they here? Kira walked first, her head held high, her dignity unshakable despite being barely 4 feet tall. Lith came next, glancing around with curious eyes, fighting the urge to smile at the silly outfits some of the nobles were wearing. Nari walked last, staying close to her sisters, her golden eyes wide but brave. They looked like their mother, small, yes, but proud. They were not broken things hiding in shadows, they were princesses. The Empress climbed the steps to her throne but did not sit. Instead, she turned to face her court and raised one clawed hand for silence. The room went quiet. "You look at my daughters and see weakness," she said. Her voice echoed through the great hall like rolling thunder. "You look at them and see broken things that should be hidden away. You call them defective. You say they cannot speak." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You are wrong." She gestured, and the 3 princesses stepped forward. The nobles watched with confusion as the children raised their hands and began to move them in strange, flowing patterns. They were signing, they were speaking. "My daughters have a language," Narration continued. "It is older than words. It is the language of the heart, the language of watching and understanding, the language of hands that reach out instead of mouths that shout. And I have learned it." She stepped down from the throne. The nobles shifted nervously, unsure what was happening, unsure how to respond. Narration stood before her daughters and raised her own clawed hands. Slowly, carefully, with the skill she had practiced for 6 months, she began to sign. "These are my daughters. They are not broken. They are not weak. They are strong in ways this empire has never understood. They speak a language that requires you to truly see another person, to truly pay attention. How many of us can say we do that?" She continued signing as she spoke, showing the court both languages at once. "I was taught this language by a human, a janitor, a man who came from a conquered world to scrub our floors. He saw my daughters when I did not. He loved them when I was too afraid. He gave them a voice when I had given them only silence." She gestured toward the back of the room. "Bring him forward." 2 guards approached Tiho. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was being arrested, but they simply escorted him through the crowd of towering nobles until he stood before the throne. He had never felt smaller in his life. Hundreds of draconian eyes stared at him. Hundreds of mouths curled with disgust or confusion or anger. He was a tiny human in a room of giants. But then he saw the 3 princesses smiling at him. He saw Nari waving. He saw Kira nodding with approval. He saw Lith giving him a thumbs up, a human gesture he had taught her. And he felt brave. The Empress spoke again. "This man is Park Tiho. From this day forward, he will carry the title of Imperial Voice. He will be the royal teacher of my daughters, responsible for their education and their language. He will have full noble standing in my court." The nobles erupted. Shouts of protest filled the hall. A human, a noble, this was impossible. This was an insult to draconian tradition. Narration's eyes flashed with fire. "Silence." The word was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute power. Every voice died instantly. "I am your empress," she said quietly, and somehow that was more terrifying than any shout. "I have conquered worlds. I have burned fleets. I have brought entire civilizations to their knees. Do you truly believe you can tell me what my daughters are worth? Do you truly believe you can tell me who deserves honor in my court?" No one spoke. This human saw value where we saw shame. He built bridges where we built walls. He showed my daughters that they were loved when their own people turned away. That is strength. That is nobility. That is what this empire should be. She turned to T-Ho and signed to him directly. "Thank you for everything." T-Ho's eyes filled with tears. He signed back with shaking hands. "It was my honor, Your Majesty." Then Nari broke free from her sisters and ran across the floor of the throne room. She crashed into T-Ho and hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his stomach. Kira and Lith followed. Soon all three princesses were holding onto him, and T-Ho was holding them back. And it did not matter that hundreds of nobles were watching. It did not matter that this broke every rule of protocol. They were family. Narration watched her daughters embrace the human who had saved them. And for the first time in her long life, she understood something important. Empires were not built on conquest alone. They were built on the small kindnesses that connected beings across the stars. They were built on the patience of sitting with the forgotten. They were built on hands that reached out instead of claws that struck down. She looked at her court, at the shocked and confused faces of her nobles, and she smiled. "The ceremony is complete," she announced. "Let the feast begin." As the nobles scattered to the banquet halls, still whispering, still confused, Narration descended the steps and joined her daughters and their teacher. Nari looked up at her mother and signed. He always came back. Narration looked at T-Ho, at this small human who had changed everything, and she signed back. "And now so will I." The galaxy would remember this day, not for the battles won or the worlds conquered, but for the moment an empress learned that true strength was not in fire and destruction. It was in the quiet patience of sitting beside those the universe had forgotten, and teaching them they were not alone. And in the years that followed, the Draconian Empire changed, slowly at first, then faster. Sign language became a recognized form of communication. Deaf and disabled Draconians were no longer hidden away. Humans were treated with new respect. All because one janitor, one quiet man with a mop and a kind heart, had decided that 3 small children deserved to be heard. And in the end, the whole galaxy listened.